All right, everyone, why don't we go ahead and get started. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alex Smith, and I am the National Chairman for the College Republican National Committee. I am moderating the University of the Future panel. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about higher education these days, the state of our universities and how we prepare our students for college. I think that we spend a lot of time focusing on what's wrong with the universities currently, higher tuition costs, higher textbook costs, and just sort of an overall broken, outdated system. But I think what CPAC hopes this to be is to be more of a forward-looking panel, something that discusses reforms and sort of what the future of the university system looks like. Obviously, it's a system that dates back to medieval times. I mean, this is a historic institution that certainly has a future, but perhaps a different one than we have experienced it. So I will introduce our wonderful panelists here today. We have Katherine Mangu-Ward of Reason Magazine. We have Chris Long of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. We have Neal from the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, and Mike Farris from the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. So I'll start off, and I mean this to be more of a free-flowing discussion. We could take some questions from the audience as we sort of see fit here, some time permitting. But I wanted to start off by discussing just generally talking about the use of online courses, if we can, as sort of that's what I think comes to mind for a lot of us when we think about the future of the university. Sort of what role are they playing in that forward-looking process? And how do you preserve the heart of, the liberal arts education when everyone's sort of scattered and there isn't a lot of room for discussion, online? Is there a way to preserve that online? Like, how do you build that community? So I will start off with anyone who wants to take that question first.
Maybe I'll start. In addition to being with Homeschool Legal Defense Association, I'm the founder and chancellor of Patrick Henry College. And one theme that I'm sure will resonate well with all of you all, the online college education field is being harmed by government. Surprise. The regulatory environment that affects colleges generally is not designed to advance education. In fact, I'll illustrate this with a specific example that will prove it forever. When we started Patrick Henry, I went down to the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools office and asked them if they had an exemplary application for accreditation that we could take a look at. And they said, oh, sure. They gave it to me. It was for a community college in Florida. And in this community college in Florida, I read their goals, and their goals were that 80% of their graduates would be able to read. I'm not joking. That was their goal. And so 80%. Now,
at least 80%?
Yeah. We already had people going to top law schools, getting PhDs in various places, and we weren't accredited. And accreditation has absolutely nothing to do with educational quality. It has everything to do with market control. And so the online environment, the regulatory environment, is driving out all the small guys. And it's going to be left to the University of Phoenix's and the Liberty Universities of the world. Big state universities and small institutions are going to be driven out. Now, I will say that there's a difference between online education and, well, there's a difference between two kinds of college education. There's education, and then there's getting a credential. Most colleges these days is about getting a credential, not about actual education. And I would simply tell you, I don't think you'll be at the peak of education ever in an online environment. You can get a credential just as well in an online environment as you can. But I've taught online constitutional law for 20 years, and it goes pretty well, and I like it. But it is nowhere near the kind of class that happens when I'm in face-to-face with kids, interacting, talking it over. And a classical liberal arts education, I think the middle is going to be hollowed out in the future, that the brick and mortar schools that all they're offering is a credential are going to lose market share, and that's going to go to the online environment. But those few of us that are actually doing a traditional liberal arts education where we have a true classical core, I think there's going to be a place for that, and the results of that are going to be exceptional.
I have to say, I think you're right about the accreditation thing for sure, but I think saying that we don't, there are certain sort of higher educational values that can't be achieved online it's like saying, well, we basically know what video games are like when we just had Atari, right? Like, if Pong is it for video games, then yeah, it's not as good as lots of other options, but, you know, we're so much at the beginning of this technology, and I think, you know, the idea that there's going to be this kind of two tiers where there are some people who still get kind of Ivy-covered classic education, and that other people are just sort of getting a certificate or a license online, or getting some kind of minimal, like low-end product. I think actually there's every reason to think that online could be better than real life, as online is better than real life already for lots of things.
Well, maybe to take a little bit of a step back, and Alex asked about what is the heart of a liberal arts education. And so we've seen, you know, maybe some slight disagreement already in terms of, you know, what entails a high-quality online education. But if you even take a step further back and say, you know, when we talk about a liberal arts education, what do we mean, right? And so even back from the classical times, there's been a lot of disagreement as to what is the purpose of an education. So what we can all probably agree on is, in fact, one of the speakers last night, one of the award recipients, maybe after a couple of glasses of wine, and he was apparently surprised by his award. He said, quote, to paraphrase James Madison, ignorance is bad. So I'm not sure what quote he was looking for, but I think we could all pretty much agree that ignorance is bad, but it is, I think, difficult to agree on exactly what is the purpose of higher education. Scott Walker, whom a lot of us admire, recently got into some hot water for thinking about changing the mission of the University of Wisconsin. And so there's always been this tension. First of all, you know, since Socrates' time, it was about the pursuit of truth. If you look at all the great Ivy League schools in the United States, you know, Yale, Lux and Veritas, if you put it in more of a modern sense, it's really this concept of critical thinking, all right? So the search for truth, critical thinking, that's one purpose. The vocational purpose, getting a job, that's always been there since Cicero's time, learning how to, the practical applications of higher learning. Then we had, from Patrick Henry, Jefferson, Madison, and others, passing down the wisdom of Western civilization. So we think of a civics education. Fourth, character development. John Witherspoon, Aristotle, Cardinal Newman. There's always been this concept of ethics and learning how to be a good person, learning about beauty, virtue, et cetera. So these are the four kind of classical purposes of higher education. But there's always been these other two factors, which is really what Katherine and Mike were getting at. One is the social networking, right? Everyone talks about a college experience, right? You kind of, this is where you grow up, this is where you meet friends, this is where you network, this is where potentially you meet a spouse. And then the sixth component is the credential, right? The reality is maybe at some point we'll get to a time where an online education has the same weight as a degree from Harvard. But today, we're nowhere near that. I mean, if you go to a dinner party or a cocktail party, and one of the first questions you're going to be asked is obviously, where'd you go to school? And if the answer is Harvard versus Prince George's Community College, I mean, the reality is we're all humans, and that reaction is going to be a little bit different. So as we think about the purpose of higher education, I think we need to look at all six of these aspects, and I think online education can be very good for at least a number of them. When it comes to critical thinking and kind of the pursuit of truth, at least online you can examine some of those issues. Passing down the truths of Western civilization, kind of civics education. There's a lot of great civics education that's available online, free of charge now. And also even the character education. You could do a lot of that online. And when it comes to coding schools and things like that, it's quite conceivable you could get a very good job. There's 3 coding schools in Silicon Valley now where anyone can go free of charge, and the starting salary is $80,000, and the tuition, everything's picked up by Google and all of the employers that are looking for coders. And we're going to start a new coding school in Wilmington, Delaware or I'm from, because J.P. Morgan and all the banks, credit card banks in Wilmington can't hire coders fast enough. But again, the question is social networking and this credential. Those are some things that we maybe need to overcome in terms of online education.
Just very quickly on the coding schools, this is actually another place where government is like spectacularly screwing up what's obviously a good thing. In Wisconsin, the state government just functionally shut down 2 new coding academies there, precisely because they've evolved this kind of elaborate credentialing system, accreditation system rather, and they have to, file a ton of paperwork and pay thousands of dollars in order to prove that they are a traditional college, when of course they're not. And they, as you say, have these ridiculous employment levels for their graduates, and the fact that we have government in there before these places even open saying this is not what education is supposed to look like is just such a fantastic sort of pocket illustration of why you should let 1,000 flowers bloom and back government out of it.
Yeah, I want to pick up on what several people have said. Obviously, now is a time of great disruption in the higher education landscape. We are seeing unbundling. We are seeing a lot of alternatives to bricks and mortar schools, and I think this is all for the good, more choices for consumers. But I also think it's fair to say that bricks and mortar is not going to disappear, and that what we want to do also is make certain that we have the finest bricks and mortar that are possible, because as Chris was saying, essentially if we're going to have a democratic republic, we have to have an educated citizenry, and we have to expect our colleges and universities to provide a quality education. What are some of the bricks and mortar schools doing in terms of online? I think some very creative things. If we look here in Maryland even, the administration has employed online technology, one, to help students figure out what courses they need to take so that they can advance to a degree more expeditiously. And then what they've also done there is they've insisted that students only take 120 credits, and they've required that some of those be online. Because that, quite frankly, is much less costly for the university. So I think there are some real opportunities in terms of online, not only just qua online, but also within the traditional institution. I also want to pick up on what Michael was talking about in terms of accreditation. We are seeing, as I say, a very dynamic landscape in higher education with a lot of new delivery systems. But when we look at our current regulatory process, the accreditation process, this is something that has seriously impeded innovation, continues to impede innovation, and has quite frankly watched a serious decline in quality across the country. Accreditation was essentially created back in the late 50s, early 60s. It's an industrial era model. It assumed that peer review bodies would come in and develop quality assurance guidelines. It essentially took what was a voluntary system of peer review and then made them gatekeepers for federal financial aid. And as I'm sure some of you know in this room, these peer review bodies are made up of administrators and faculty. It's a cozy little system. And so what we have seen over the last 50, 60 years is essentially rising costs, agendas in our colleges and universities that have anything to do with educational quality, and meanwhile Title IV continues to flow. The American Council of Trustees and Alumni has put forth an alternative to the existing accreditation system, and I commend it to you. What we are arguing is that we should really start from scratch, because in 2015 we're in an entirely different world than we were in 1965. And rather than having these intrusive peer review bodies coming on college campuses and forcing these institutions to spend upwards of $1 million, what we really need is to allow institutions to self-certify key consumer information about the demographics of those who come in, their graduation rates, their default rates. We need to be assured that they have financial responsibility. And last but not least, we think Title IV money should be conditioned on those schools that actually show student learning gains. This is something that could be done easily and simply. It would not require a vast accreditation monopoly, and it would give institutions the opportunity to spend their resources on education rather than on a failed bureaucratic framework.
Will your organization be using those guidelines for who can participate with you? Because we're not eligible, because we're not regionally accredited.
That's right. We have drawn a line in terms of the schools that we look at, but I know once you get accredited, we will have you in our What Will They Learn?
Well, I mean, we're not, we may never, we're nationally accredited with the Christian Accrediting Association. We may never be regionally accredited. And it seems to me to be hypocritical to recognize that that system is utterly broken and then punish people. I would suggest we are the best college in the country meeting the goals that you have as an organization. And if our movement is going to succeed, we can't have people who are gatekeepers for money and resources applying standards that basically tie the hands of people that are doing what you want it to be done, but because we refuse to play with the leftist agenda of the regional accreditors, we're being punished. So it seems to me a little hypocritical.
I hear you. I know you've articulated that, and we understand that when you do various programs, you set lines. And we have a special rating called whatwilltheylearn.com, and I hope you all will go to that website. It has a number of judgments, including 7 core courses that we hope colleges and universities will require. And again, there are many people who disagree with the 7 that we've picked, but you have to throw down a gauntlet in the sand, which we have done, and we look at 7 core courses: composition, American history or government, foreign language at an intermediate level, math, science, and literature, and economics. I forgot the last one. So I hope you'll look at that, because one of the things that we deeply admire, and I certainly understand from Michael's perspective, we admire schools that have a strong core curriculum, because our sense is that one of the problems today with American higher education is that college students are spending a lot of money and graduating with vast gaps in their skills and knowledge. And that if we go back to a core curriculum, we'll give students the foundation of skills and knowledge they need to be educated citizens. And moreover, it will provide us with a common conversation, which I think we all are desperately hoping to have, a common conversation, a civil discourse about the challenges that face us. And I think we can definitely criticize our colleges and universities for undermining that common conversation.
The delightful tension on this panel, which it's a fantastic example of why we don't want a giant pile of money being thrown in the middle of this debate by the federal government, right? This isn't a problem. If she doesn't want to accredit him, no problem, as long as what we're doing is looking at a whole bunch of private actors who are saying, like, listen, check out our list, you check out our list, you can decide, who provides the values that you want. It's precisely the word gatekeepers that's the problem, right? Once we have a giant pile of money, which every politician ever wants to add to always, like every State of the Union speech is like more money for college, every governor, more money for state schools. The giant pile of money makes enemies out of friends, right? Like everyone on this panel should be saying, we want education to be better and better, and we are, but there's also always going to be these tensions, this sort of push and pull when there is sort of finite resources that have to be allocated somewhat irrationally. Far better to say, listen, if you need to take out a loan for college, luckily we have this amazing, highly sophisticated system to decide what levels of debt it's appropriate for people to take on. Now, admittedly, the mortgage crisis suggests that the system is not perfect, but banks, we have these banks that have formulas about who should get what money to do what. And the idea that somehow, Barack Obama is going to be better at doing that math than the Bank of America strikes me as rather absurd.
In terms,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of what Katherine was just saying, and Mike earlier kind of alluded to this concept of the barbell. So you've got these schools, the Ivy League schools, the large research universities that ACTA is really focused on and trying to influence, and then you've got these purely kind of online schools over here, which are getting better and better, and maybe at some point will be, the credential will be as valuable as a degree from Harvard. But in the middle, I think it's very exciting. You've got Patrick Henry, you've got a whole slew of more liberty-oriented and Christian schools, Catholic evangelical schools, and so it really is a situation where we have 1,000 flowers are blossoming, and we have to figure out as conservatives, how do we work with this whole range of schools in higher education. So at ISI, traditionally, we were very strong on the most liberal elite schools, because there's always going to be a small percentage of students that are rebelling against that left-wing orthodoxy. We've got also great societies and chapters at Christendom and places like Patrick Henry and Hillsdale and others, and you may say, well, why do you need a conservative organization at a conservative school like that? But, we're training these students how to become journalists and how to credential them so they can go out and have a big impact in the culture. And the same thing online. We've got a conference coming up in Indianapolis, and about half of the enrollees are from an online school. And so it's really incumbent on all of us within the conservative movement to figure out how we, it's not an either-or type of a question. We need to be in there working with students no matter how they decide to become educated.
I'd like to just visit a quick topic that's near and dear to my heart. So, assuming that we want to arm our students with the best possible set of skills to make them the most successful, develop curricula that makes sense. Part of the university culture, the brick and mortar schools, as you call them, undoubtedly is a social element to it. There is human capital that is created on university campuses that I think I find it difficult but not impossible to envision occurring in an online sort of digital space. And, shout out to all of the college Republicans who showed up today. These guys will tell you it's some of the hardest work to go to a commuter campus and to establish a club there. These are clubs that have built up all of us, that have given us all of the connections and the networking and the professional experiences that were really important and added to our education in immeasurably important ways. So how, in sort of the university of the future, thinking about our topic here, how do we, while preserving sort of a more democratized environment in terms of accreditation and removing sort of government regulations from the process, how do we preserve a culture online? Is it possible to, how do we basically build human capital in this future digital age?
I think one answer to that is that we just don't expect universities to do that at all. The University of the Future is not one thing. It's definitely an exploded university, right? So you can imagine one entity that does accreditation. You can imagine another entity that does the actual imparting of content. For all I care, you could just have a bunch of apartment buildings where people who are age 18 to 22 are allowed to live and hang out together and form clubs, right? That that element of it is not intrinsically related, or it's only intrinsically related because of a kind of path-dependent thing that this is what universities have always done. But there's no reason why, if you want to just get out of your parents' house, maybe learn how to make ramen noodles, and also try to get some skills that will make someone somewhere think that you might be employable. That's what people go to college for, and there's no reason why, the thing that we have that is a college campus today should be doing all of those tasks. So, I think maybe the college Republicans in 2025 will just have to change its name, and it'll be Young Republicans or whatever, although I'm sure that exists too, and probably some of you are here, sorry. You can merge, you figure it out. But, the idea that there is somehow this college student, which is a different special person who is doing a different special thing for this 4-year education vacation, which, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it a lot. But, the idea that all those functions are going to sort of adhere together forever strikes me as wildly unlikely for the most part. And also, I think people are great at forming clubs and institutions online. I work on projects online with people that I have never met and feel strongly about those people, right? Any Wikipedia editor is basically part of a close-knit club where people form alliances and do plenty of backstabbing, which I know is an important part of all college Republican groups. This is something that people find a way to do no matter where you put them. And I think the idea that we need to kind of keep this glued onto also learning chemical engineering strikes me as unlikely.
Well, I think my point was not so much how do we preserve the existing structure, but more so how do we adapt it to whatever the future looks like. So basically, I guess, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater approach.
I have both sides of my life wanting to say something that may seem contradictory. The homeschooling part of me says, I agree with you, what you just said exactly. The socialization, networking part can be completely decoupled from the academic part and be done quite successfully. One recent example of that is that I shook hands with a state legislator named Nathan Toman in North Dakota a couple of weeks ago. I defended Nathan when he was a little kid being homeschooled, being criminally prosecuted in the same building. Now, his socialization skills as an adult were just proven quite adaptive because he got elected to the state legislature. And so there's not a need to have academics and socialization going on at the same time. You can do it independently. Is it helpful? Yeah, it's helpful to have it on a campus. But I would like to pick up on the core curriculum idea that you mentioned a little bit ago, because there's a difference between a core curriculum and an a la carte curriculum. If you say, we want you to take a history course and a literature course and a science course, then the history course can be the history of Albanian dwarves in Botswana, in 1937, and that counts. And there's no commonality in that, just because you take a history course. And by the way, it should scare all of us about schools that at least recently, the #1 college textbook in America on any subject was a history textbook called A People's History of the American Republic. 600 pages, not a single footnote, and it said the reason that the United States entered World War II was so that we could have corporate greed driving jobs. I mean, is basically the nonsense. And so I'm actually kind of glad that people don't take American history much at the college level, because that's what they would learn. And so at Patrick Henry, we have a true core curriculum. Everyone takes a political theory class called Principles of Freedom. And that everyone takes constitutional law. Everyone takes the exact same literature sequence. Everyone takes economics. Everyone takes philosophy. Everyone takes rhetoric. It is a true core curriculum. Everyone takes, all the things she said, we do all that and more. Foreign language to the intermediate level. Everyone takes physics. Everyone takes biology. Everyone takes the math necessary to do physics, and so on. It is a true core curriculum. And the proof that it works, today we graduate about 60 kids a year. Today at Harvard Law School, right now, there are 7 Patrick Henry graduates. All 5 of them that are in their second or third year are on law review. 4 on the regular Harvard Law Review, and the 5th is on the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy. And so and the reason that's true is not merely because most of those kids were homeschooled. That does help. But the reason it's true is that the core curriculum really works. And one of our students went to the FBI Academy, and when they started talking about political philosophers like Machiavelli and others, he was the only one in the room who knew who they were, and he not only knew who they were, he had studied them. And the reason he soared to the top of the FBI Training Academy was because of the core curriculum. It really does matter. So this a la carte nonsense of take a little history here and a little science there and a little, I wouldn't give you 2 cents for it, frankly.
Well, a lot of the students that come to us, to come to ISI programs, tell us no matter where they were, if they're at Harvard or Yale, they say just that, right? Yeah. So they no one's connected the dots, and so they come to a week-long summer school, and then they say, okay, now I understand how history fits in with philosophy, fits in with politics, and that's to get Alex's point about, how do you have this shared experience? That's something we think a lot about at ISI, is trying to create shared experiences for students. And so one thing, and it's going to take us a number of years to really develop it, but one thing we're trying to do is come up with a intercollegiate philosophy, politics, and economics program, so that every student that comes through ISI, whether you're on a community college, whether you're an Ivy League school, or whether you're at Patrick Henry, can come away with a shared experience. And that's something then, through an online experience that's similar. We like to think of the I used to be in the hedge fund business for a number of years, and I used to hire analysts, and they would all, basically have to have the CFA designation. There's no government approval for the CFA designation, right? The CFA Institute came up with this self-certified program. Now, if you want to work on Wall Street, you basically need to have a CFA. So we would like to do the same thing with an IPPE, the Intercollegiate Philosophy, Politics, and Economics certification, and allow students to spend about 300 hours of work. And then we want to work with Patrick Henry and other small schools, have a consortium. They can align. Patrick Henry's courses would probably already immediately align with the PPE. And so there'd be numerous ways to study and then take this very integrated core curriculum, no matter where you are, and then everyone would have that experience. They could, share that experience, join little, just like the CFA Society has clubs, organizations in every major city. You could have the same type of thing for everyone who has basically studied and knows about liberty. So.
Yeah, let me, and I want to follow up on that as well. What we're hearing about is what are known as the distribution requirements. I'm sure all of you who are in school know exactly what they are. They are not requirements. They are requirements in name only. Basically, you can pick and choose amongst hundreds of courses, and this is what Mike is talking about. That is why we're working very hard at the American Council of Trustees and Alumni to reward those institutions that frankly get away from distribution requirements and put together a limited number of requirements in foundational areas so that students will actually graduate with exposure to key areas. Now, often we hear, well, what if the teacher is not going to do it right? What if the teacher maybe doesn't have the perspective, an entirely objective perspective? I mean, our argument is that if we can introduce students to primary documents in particular, that is important. And so we actually do believe in requirements. I think exposure to American history is better than no exposure to American history, which is why we argue for its requirement. Now, if you look at colleges and universities today, there are only about 18% of them that actually require American history or government of their graduates, and we think that is unfortunate. But through our What Will They Learn rating, we showcase those schools that are doing a good job, that are essentially saying, here is what we want our students to know and be able to do. Christopher Newport University is the first of the public universities that has a perfect score. They have all 7 requirements, American history and government being one of them. Baylor, Pepperdine, University of Georgia, Kennesaw State, a number of institutions. And we think it's important to empower families and consumers to know what value schools are adding. And so that's why we have What Will They Learn as a rating system, and that's why we urge you to take a look at it. The interesting thing about it also is it is much more affordable to provide a more limited pathway to graduation. And I think we're seeing more and more schools are realizing that when you have vast numbers of choices, it's often easy to go down a byway, and so instead of graduating in 4 years, we're now seeing people graduating in 5 years and 6 years. And so there's not only an academic quality issue here in terms of going back to a core curriculum, there's also a cost benefit as well.
To enliven the panel, I'll disagree with my friend Ann on this point. It's not always better to have to study American history than not to study American history. And I'll just point out one anecdote. The National Association of Scholars that we, everyone here on the table works with, did a very very detailed study at the University of Texas system. So all the students that go to all the UT schools and Texas A&M, the state legislature in Texas demanded that you have to take 2 courses on American history. So they analyzed all these hundreds of courses that are taught, and they found that over 75% of them are taught from a race, gender, and class perspective. So extremely left-wing. And of the professors teaching the courses, over 75% of them did their dissertations on subjects relating to race, class, and gender. So in general, obviously, I am in favor of a core education. I'm obviously in favor of studying American history, the type of American history you'd learn at Patrick Henry College, but not the type of American history you'd learn at, sadly, many of these UT schools.
I want to ask one more question about the cosmetics of this debate, and then we can open it up to the audience for questions. But so if the aim is to deregulate the market in terms of credentialing and accreditation, how do we raise the publicity and the notoriety of this debate to the simplicity that's found in the debate over Uber, for example? I think that that's something, at least for millennials, it's a very easy, digestible concept. All of a sudden you have a very fast, convenient ride, and then taxi cab unions are trying to take that away. It's just something that seems antithetical to our generation that thrives on this sort of bottom-up organic engagement with the world. How do we take this debate and sort of raise it to that level?
So Uber's strategy is, I think, incredibly instructive, because what Uber does is they go into a market, then they get everyone to fall in love with them, and they do it so fast that governments, local governments particularly, take a minute to say, like, wait, we meant for this to be illegal? And in that time, everyone has seen what a superior product it is. I mean, they do this over and over. Like, they go into a city where they know they're not welcome, and they pretend like they are. They just are like, oh, sorry, wait, do you guys have a taxi commission we should have talked to here? Our bad. This is the I mean, this is already the model that's happening with higher education. There are like tons of players who are just saying, you know, better to ask forgiveness than permission, and probably we don't even need to ask forgiveness, and they just go in. I mean, you know, Patrick Henry is in fact a great example of this, but it's everywhere, including, you know, like Tyler Cowen's Marginal Revolution University, right? Like, George Mason happens to be an incredibly open-minded institution, and so they're fine with a full-time tenured, you know, faculty member doing a side venture that is a direct competition to the product they provide, but lots of schools wouldn't be. Better to ask forgiveness than permission. Just get in, and you know, I can't even get in a taxi now. Like, you get in a taxi and you're like, I have to find my credit card, and like, why is there duct tape on the seat? And like, oh my God, it's really horrible. Yeah, I'll like let taxis go by me to wait for my Uber to come. And I think that's the moment that we're in with higher education. We just have to get enough Ubers on the street, right? We just have to it's not a coincidence also that we have Uber and Lyft and all those other ones that have dumb names missing a consonant. You know, the competition in the space, even in a sort of gray market, quasi-legal space, is still an incredible driving force for quality. And I just think we're right there in all kinds of ways, including stuff that's not even a direct competitor to universities like Singularity University, where, you know, it's a cocktail party credential. You say, oh, where did you go to college? If somebody said to me Singularity University, that gets you nothing in terms of official recognition, but I would still be like, let's go get a drink. You know what I mean? And if that's the point, then that's a success. So I can see, I think the Uber model is a perfect model, and it's precisely a good model because you don't need anybody's permission.
I can't overemphasize the necessity to get the government out of this. And so the question is, how's that going to happen? Because, I mean, we get kids, you know, want to come to Patrick Henry, and you know, the parents see the value of our education, say it's clearly superior to any other school that they're looking at, but then they start looking at federal student loan programs and other things like that, and they're making dollar and cents decisions that may seem wise to them now, but we'll, you know, see how it works out for them. But getting the government out of this, getting the federal government out of it in particular, is an absolute necessity unless we just want to crash the whole system. And I know only one way to do that, and that is not working in Washington, D.C. My other project I'm working on is the Convention of the States project, which has a serious aim and an actual opportunity to get the federal government out of this business entirely. And so it's got to free up our opportunities in a whole lot of ways, but this is just one of the many applications. You get rid of the U.S. Department of Education, you get rid of all federal spending on education, you've just done something major for the freedom and good for education in this country.
I couldn't agree more, but if you take a step back and ask, you know, what should it cost to deliver, you know, we went through these 6 areas. If you're thinking about, okay, studying philosophy, politics, and economics, if you want a good civics education, you want to, you know, basically some, you know, intellectual curiosity, what should that cost? Should it cost $200,000? You know, certainly not. So again, what we're trying to do, and we want to work with other groups to come up with some type of certification program, maybe for $2,500 or $5,000 or maybe even less. You can basically learn everything you need to know about Western civilization. And so it's possible you could go to a coding school, you can get a job for $80,000 a year, and you could have gone through this IPPE program, and you can have a better education than someone who spent 4 years at a traditional liberal arts college. So I think there are going to be solutions like that where you can, we want a core curriculum, not an a la carte selection of classes, but again, the disaggregation. So you can learn a vocation here, you can learn about virtue here, you can learn about Western civilization over here, and you tie it all together, and it's going to cost, you know, a heck of a lot less than $200,000.
I think it's all about information and choice. Right now, we have a fairly opaque system. Certainly, the accreditation system really tells you nothing. You either accredit or you aren't. And you could be graduating 9% or you could be graduating 99%. There's no way that the consumer can tell simply looking at that label, which is why I want to get back again to what can we do about this. I don't think that we're likely to see the Department of Education eliminated as they reauthorize the Higher Education Act, but I do think it might be possible for us to rethink accreditation and to provide a system that gives consumers key information that they compare and contrast institution by institution and will show whether or not those schools are actually adding value and providing cognitive gain for students. I think another interesting thing is to look at things like the CLA Plus. This is a test that is available out there now for students, regardless of where you go to school or if you don't go to college at all. You can take this, you can show that you have critical thinking skills, and you can supply it to an employer who can choose to employ you because you've been able to show that you have what is necessary at that workplace. So I think employers have a real opportunity here to be receptive to alternative credentials, and this will be an extremely disruptive way of going at bricks and mortar schools.
The thing I would add to that is don't give money to schools who are doing it wrong, even if you went to college there. And I would say don't give money to any organization that uses regional accreditation as a criteria for getting in. It doesn't make any sense to preach against accreditation and then have that as the only reason Patrick Henry College isn't in her club is because we're not regionally accredited. We're nationally accredited with a Christian group. That's the only reason. And so I would suggest don't give money. She's in competition. We're in competition with each other. Don't give money through her organization. Don't listen to what she says because she's not practicing what she preaches. And if accreditation is wrong, why are you using it as a standard? And why are you denying us access to a whole army of donors who could help us compete against the government-funded institutions? Why would you give money to institutions that get government funding when you have the opportunity to give money to schools who don't get government money? I would suggest never, ever, ever give a nickel to any school that takes a nickel of taxpayer money. They already got your money. Don't give them any more. And there's only about 3 or 4 schools that qualify, and you can go figure out who they are. It really is a very narrow group that takes 0 government funding, no federal student loans or anything like that. So I would just urge you, don't give money to the bad guys.
Wait, should we give money to the bad guys?
No.
So we have time to probably take about 3 questions with some healthy discussion from the audience before we have to clear the room for another event that's going on here. I know you had your hand raised earlier.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm from the Stone Age, so back in my university days, I took CPAC exams, which I used library books for free, studied on my own, and paid a couple bucks for a test, and managed to get some credits that way. That was the brick and mortar version of online learning, and I think it works well. It's not perfect, but I was just as educated as the rest. I support the obsolescence of traditional degrees. I think we can look at alternative certification and metrics for defining one's acquisition of knowledge and skills. As far as these accreditations, are there other private alternatives that will accredit schools so that we can use them to judge schools and get away from government accreditation?
Well, it's going to depend on the law. I mean, Virginia, to have the word college in your title, you have to be accredited by an agency that's accredited by the Federal Department of Education. That's the law.
Academy or colleges.
Well, you could, but and that's why there is a Christian accrediting group that we have been fully accredited by, but. The reality is what's going on with Gordon College in Massachusetts right now, Gordon Cromwell, you need to pay attention to, because schools that don't buy into the homosexual agenda are not going to be able to be regionally accredited for very much longer. Christian schools are going to have a real problem, and so it's yet another reason why I think the regional accreditation barrier is. It's about it's enforcing political correctness upon us. It's all on the money thing. We could cut the tuition costs of Patrick Henry by at least a third. if it wasn't for the government regulation compliance issues that we have. Even under our kind of unique approach of doing it, we still have compliance issues. And it adds cost. It adds dramatic cost. And so, I like the self-reporting stuff. I think that would be really good.
We're working hard to help Patrick Henry in that way.
Yeah.
Hi, so I wanted to know if you guys had any ideas of how colleges can get away from being money makers and get back to education. Because I know my university has recently, in the past 2 years since I've been there, instituted specific policies that are completely against education and just keep the money within them. We're not allowed to take classes outside of the university for credit if we are an Intercollegiate student. We are not allowed to take CLEP exams, as this wonderful woman pointed out. I looked into that. I wanted to do that because I felt like I had the knowledge already and I should be required to take a course that I already have knowledge in. But so how do you think we can deal with that issue?
And I think the problem isn't money versus education, right? The problem is stupid government money versus education, and that's a big difference, right? I mean, I think the answer is actually, and I think a lot of people are working really hard on this right now. Institutions that can figure out how to make money while still giving students the kind of choices that they want, and in everywhere else, in every other kind of market, that's how you make money, right? You say, okay, here's a type of customer I want to target, and let me figure out how to provide the services they want in a way that makes me profit, right? The market, ta-da! Education isn't like that because the money comes with so many strings. And so what we've seen, and I know that Anne's institution has done a bunch of great work on this, the incredible explosion of administration costs inside of traditional schools, it's because that's the easiest way to spend the dumbest money and keep it. And federal money is the dumbest money. And this is also, I mean, frankly, I am to some extent an apologist for the University of Phoenix and similar. They get $1 billion a year of federal money for helping their students fill out forms in the right way. And that's dumb money, and it's making this institution dumber. It could and should be a flexible, interesting, dynamic place. And they do stuff like spend $200 million a year trying to improve how they teach, which regular bricks and mortar colleges don't do. They say, like, well, we'll just leave it to the professors. And the idea of being systematic about improving your teaching is something that you would see in a private market. But the University of Phoenix and so many others are slowed down by these federal dollars. And I think that's what you're seeing at your school is they just want to make sure that they can check as many boxes for you to get each dollar that you're entitled to inside their own institution. So again, I hate to be a broken record, federal money is a problem.
They're bloated bureaucracies, right? So one major issue is you've got the complete corruption because of the government money, right? We all agree with that. But also you look, I used to manage money for Yale's endowment and MIT's and University of Chicago's endowment. And they've, Harvard's got $30 billion, Yale's got more than $20 billion. And so they really, you've got this bloated bureaucracy. These institutions don't exist to funnel money into the classroom and to focus on students anymore. When I was an undergrad at George Washington University up the road, we used to, joke that it's really a real estate investment trust, wrapper around, a little bit of an educational institution. And so, that's where Anne has her work cut out for her at ACTA, is to try to work with these trustees to reform them. But at the end of the day, if you're any major university, you're getting, hundreds of millions of dollars in research money from the federal government. You're getting all this money, as Mike points out, from all the Pell Grants and student loans and everything. You've got this massive multi-billion-dollar endowment. I would just argue it's impossible to reform these institutions. You basically just have to burn them down and start from scratch.
But not literally.
Well, and if I can say so, we already heard mention of Governor Walker. I mean, when you have a governor, wherever the governor is, whatever state, whatever party, who is basically saying, let's get some more data about our public universities. Let's find out about teacher productivity. Let's take a look at administrative expenses. We need to support those policymakers because that needs to be a national conversation. The administrative expenses have skyrocketed across the country, and we've been seeing institutions essentially competing on amenities. They're not competing on educational value, they're competing on lazy rivers or sushi bars. And I think this again is where ever since 2008 in the economic downturn, we've seen some real opportunities. Clayton Christensen of the Harvard Business School has predicted that 50% of public and private schools will go bankrupt in the next 15 years because they are all competing on amenities. They're all on a plan that basically assumes that you provide everything to everybody, and that's just not a sustainable plan. And so I think the opportunity now is for organizations such as ACTA and others here to get out information about schools that are adding value and to let consumers basically follow with their feet in their wallets to those institutions that are providing academic value and are doing it in an affordable way.
Think of time for one more quick question. You in the back there?
Education is one of those odd things where you're learning how to, you're learning knowledge so that you can understand how to make decisions. And if you understood that, you wouldn't need the education, but you need that to understand which education you're getting. How are we reaching people who are 17-year-olds, the 16-year-olds, and telling them that this is what they should be looking at, making sure that it's important for their parents as well?
There's one person who's actually doing something really interesting on that front, which is Peter Thiel, who is everybody's favorite cookie pants libertarian billionaire, and he has this program called 20 Under 20, where he pays really, really promising teenagers not to go to college. And this is something that, it's a bit of a stunt, but it's also a good point, right? He's just saying to these 17 and 18-year-olds who are trying to make decisions about their future, you know, remember your only choice isn't to go with the cookie cutter $200,000, Midland quality liberal arts education. Maybe you should start a company now. And so like that's a small part of the solution, but one thing is just to make it obvious. And Mike Rowe, who has a great show on CNN now, is another person who says like, hey, have you thought about plumbing? And like literally just saying that to an upper middle class kid could be hugely eye-opening. I think, lots of people have written about this, like liberal arts education isn't for everyone, college isn't for everyone. Just saying, think about your other options is already a huge step in the right direction.
If you go online basically, if you send me an email, I'll give it to you for free, but they're only a couple bucks a piece. We've got 16 different guides to every, first of all, what is a liberal education, what is a core, but also, every subject, so English and political theory and American history and philosophy. Which is a great introduction. A lot of homeschool kids take advantage of them, as well as other high school students. And so you can go to isi.org and get all that information for virtually free.
The last couple of words that you said, I think, is the answer to your question. Kids don't know everything they need to know. Their parents have to help them. And so, we ought not to put this decision solely upon kids. No, the young person needs to make a choice. The worst students we have at Patrick Henry College are where their parents force them to come to Patrick Henry College. I want no such students on our campus. But guidance from the parent is essential. And so an educated parent is the best tool that we possibly can have to aid in this process. They need good guidance, and that's why you need good parents.
And also grandparents.
Yes,
students listen to grandparents even more than parents. So any grandparents in the room, make sure you talk to all your grandkids.
And try goacta.org, because it's meant for parents and grandparents to really outline what schools are doing across the country. We have materials such as this one, which compares and contrasts the state flagships. How are they doing in terms of administrative costs versus instructional costs? How are they doing on core curriculum? How are they doing in terms of tuition increases? What percentage of median household income? Basically looking at governance, because again, as you all leave this room, what can you do? The governors are critical to higher education reform. They appoint the public trustees. These should be important positions, and governors should be making certain that trustees are equipped with the information they need to make affordable, quality higher education. That is why the American Council of Trustees and Alumni exists. exists. We are here to be an independent resource for college and university trustees around the country. Typically, they receive their information only from their administrators. And I'm not dissing administrators, but frankly, they need to know how are they doing in comparison to other places, how can they do better, what are other places doing to reduce costs and increase quality. That's why we're here, and so I urge you to keep pressure on your policymakers, keep pressure on your governors to appoint trustees who have students first and who don't listen to the internal constituencies that more money is always the answer, and praise those that are doing that.
Well, I want to thank our panel for a very thoughtful discussion. And thank you all for listening and for all of your questions.